So let's face Saturn. So there are times in your life when you need to face Saturn. And as we learn more about Saturn today, and certainly what I alluded to in my very brief story time, is that there are times in your life, such as the Saturn return, where you need to face your decisions. You need to face the choices that you've made. You need to look at your life and perhaps even through a very hard, sobering lens. One of these times is a very predictable time. That's age 29. And some of these times are not so predictable. And this is very specific to your own astrology. And these are moments where we can hit a hard wall. This is a moment when we hear a no, or this is a moment when we suddenly realize all the choices that we've been making and where they've led us. And like I said, these are times where you have to face yourself, face your choices, face what you've built, and even face what you've become. And I realize that there's a lot of intensity in this slide, but it's real. And that's something that we all have to understand with Saturn. As much as it is my favorite planet, it is a real planet, and there is no cutting corners with Saturn. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I love it and respect it. And because it kicked my ass, sorry, I shouldn't be swearing, so much at age 29 that it made me into who I am. And hopefully, I mean, I'm not a perfect person and I'm still growing and learning, but made me into the person that I am at this point, 13 years, 14 years, 15 years later. One of the things I like to talk about with Saturn is that it can come to us in three forms. Saturn can be the life coach. It's not about Saturn. It can be a parent, meaning Saturn can tell us, do this, don't do this. You do this, there's consequences. Or Saturn can come to us like the cops. Now, this is a very, when you experience Saturn as the cops, that's not a common experience. And these are the times, and of course, you all are, I'm sure, upstanding citizens, but these are times where we suddenly realize that we have transgressed, or somebody tells us that we have transgressed. We've gone against a border, a boundary. We have made a choice that's had a negative impact, and we need to understand the consequences of our choices. While we are in a physical body, which is to say, while we are here alive, we are bound by the laws of Saturn. It's time, karma, and aging. These are things that you and I cannot get around. As much, times we go to the cosmic, they do like the Botox and stuff, but yeah, time, karma, and aging. Saturn marks the passage of time and the major milestones of our lives. So this is where we sometimes will, especially if we're learning astrology, or we've sort of heard some things about Saturn, we forget that Saturn actually marks the major milestones of our lives. What are major milestones of our lives? Well, it's when we get married, when we have a baby, we start a family, when we make a major move, when we get a promotion in our career, maybe even when you stand on a platform, the 33rd Street subway platform in New York City, and say, I want to be an astrologer. I'll have to kind of figure out where my astrology was at that time, other than Saturn returning. Saturn has a well-deserved reputation for limits, illness, struggle, and loss. I don't want to sugarcoat Saturn. And maybe this is the Scorpio in me talking. I think Saturn is a fantastic planet. There's a lot of positive things that we can do with Saturn, but it's also a planet that has a well-deserved reputation. And here's a case in point. When I got infected with COVID, I'm pretty sure I know when it was. Saturn was almost to the arc minute. This is for those who know some transits, square to my sun. And the sun is a point of vitality in astrology. Certainly, this is a very traditional way of looking at astrology. And I got sick. Maybe I shouldn't have been out. Maybe that's Saturn showing me the the results of my choices, for example. So when I was preparing for this webinar and I was writing about, you might have seen some things that I put on social media. There was quite a few people that said like, oh, because of Saturn, I can't have a relationship, or because of Saturn, X, Y, and Z. And if we're going to play the who has a worse Saturn than whomever, then I'm going to play that game too. I mean, I'm not really going to play that game, but I have Saturn in hard aspect to the ruler of my sun and my moon, the rulers of angles. I have Saturn conjunct the North Node. I know Saturn. It's really easy to point a finger at Saturn and be like, this is the reason I'm not in a relationship. This is the reason I'm not successful, da, 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 da. And I think it's a trap. I think we need to understand that Saturn is an energy. That energy can either pull us down or lift us up. And that can change in any moment, but we have to do the work. And Saturn, as we go through more of this presentation, you see that Saturn actually has a roadmap for each and every one of us. We didn't come into this life to fail. That sounds very cruel if we did. So if you have Saturn in your relationship sign, Saturn actually loves relationships. I've seen plenty of people that have been married for 30, 40 years with Saturn in their relationship sign. So maybe you're single for other reasons. But in all seriousness, it's really about understanding that Saturn, it's not a boogeyman, it's an energy, it's an archetype, and that energy and that archetype, it meets our awareness and our consciousness and our choices. And that's not to say that that's the magic bullet to sailing through life. Certainly life is going to be hard at times. If you're fixed signs right now, you know what I'm talking about. But Saturn can be your best ally. So it's my belief that when you know where Saturn is in your astrology, you have a map as well as a standard to hold yourself through. Maybe this is the very pragmatic part of me. Maybe this is actually the positive side of Saturn squaring everything in my chart. Is that Saturn is like, here's the rules, here's the lesson plan, here's the structure. And I'm like, wait a second, you mean there's a cheat sheet? Yeah, there's a cheat sheet. Doesn't mean that you cheat in the sense that you skip over your lessons, but it really takes some guesswork out of it. So knowing the details of our Saturn placement helps us to connect the dots. To go back to my story, when I went through my Saturn return, I was Googling like crazy. Yes, I had Google in 2008. And I was like, what's the Saturn return? I actually discovered, well, that's not true. I got a job. I got a job that I found on Craigslist. And this was a job that was writing horoscopes for 2 astrologers in New York City. And the job description was practically written for me. They wanted somebody going through their Saturn return. Oh, that's me. They wanted somebody with Saturn and Virgo. They wanted somebody with tech experience. And some of you may know that I have a 20-year background, well, at this point, 20-year background in IT. And I, for a few years, worked for them. I helped to write horoscopes. I helped to run their website. But it was through that I saw that Saturn was a really powerful planet. And it sort of gave me a sense of mission and purpose, because I remember one of the things that I read about when I was learning about Saturn in the 9th house, which is Saturn in the 9th house, and we'll go through the houses later. And one of the things it says, you're learning to have faith. And I tell you what I went through at that time, it was like everything in my power to stay alive. Like, maybe this is a little real, but it's true. There was a moment where I didn't know I was going to make it past age 29, because it just felt so bleak and horrible. But I remember when I read about having faith, and I nearly burst into tears. I remember I was on the subway. I was always in the subway, because that word cut right to my heart of what I was trying and what I was struggling with at that time. And that knowledge, I think, saved me, if I'm being completely honest. And that's probably the first time I've ever said that out loud, because it gave sense to something that at that time seemed so random and so destructive. So when I said to myself, or the universe, that I wanted to be an astrologer, it was coming from that place. It was like, this is the most powerful thing I've ever learned in my life. Why don't more people know about this? So that's why we're here tonight. I mean, yeah, it's 13 years later, 14 years later, but that's why we're here tonight. It's because I'm not the first person to talk about the Saturn return. I'm not the last person to talk about the Saturn return or even Saturn, but this is my connection to the planet. Saturn is what you are becoming. Wherever Saturn is in your astrology, by theme, by archetype, by this sort of this role that you're stepping into throughout the course of your life. Your Saturn is your legacy. These are the things that you build, the things that you learn, the things that weigh down your life, and I mean that in the best possible way. And this is what people remember about you and your time on this planet. And certainly the lessons that you learn are what you take with you to the other side. It may take time. It may take blood, sweat, and tears, but Saturn represents your highest potential. That's what I love about astrology. It's not a fate. It is a framework. It's a roadmap. It's a blueprint. And if you know what your highest potential is, I don't know, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, maybe you're different than I am, but I'm like, okay, I need to know, where am I headed? What is the best that I could look? And I'm going to work hard to get it to look like that. Hopefully, God willing, I'm successful. So we just have to say yes to Saturn and put in the work. And I think that's one of the most powerful things we can do. And I think for me, and I can only speak for myself, is that knowing, for example, that I have Saturn the 9th, I have Saturn in Virgo, that my highest potential is to teach, it's to share, it's to take something really esoteric, because I have the nodes in Pisces Virgo, and make it practical and make it lived. If that's me living the highest potential of my Saturn, great. But hopefully we'll be on this planet more, and I'll get to discover even more expressions of my own Saturn placement